Test. Okay. Hello. Greetings, this is Zanno Thanalis, a 3,000-year-old vampire, here for entertainment, learning, or entertainment, education, and whatever else comes to mind. Today, can be something a little strange and almost certainly, untested. Not going to go as far to say that it's never before been seen or anything like that, but certainly going out on a bit of a limb here. Previous streams have been focused on the playing games, talking about the games that I'm playing. This is going to be a bit more of an educational stream, hopefully. If anyone comes upon this afterward, there are probably better resources elsewhere, to be perfectly honest. But figure that if I have this vast amount of knowledge from my life, and all that I do forget some things, but still I like to be able to share it or talk about it with other people and share some of my interests. So, something that I find very interesting, and so made this to be the topic of this first foray into this kind of content, would be etymology. Go ahead and transition. Okay. Nice blue screen for the moment. This is the definition of etymology as given by dictionary.com. The study of historical linguistic change, especially as manifested in individual words. Basically, what did words mean in the past and how did they get to where they were now? Next up is a different definition of etymology, this one a little more homebrewed. Etymology, the study of truth or of the true meaning of something. And you can see how these are they're pretty closely linked. Understanding the true meaning of something, but etymology as it is more modernly perceived is more specifically about words and their historical meaning. So, how do we get from one to the other? This is what a lot of etymology looks like. It is taking words into, I believe, the most fundamental basic building blocks that we can, and then combine them together and try to figure out, okay, how do we go from this literal meaning to the more figurative meaning? And this can be quite a journey for some words. In this case, etymology comes from ancient Greek etymos, true or actual, and logia, study of. So study of true meaning of things, which then over time, as it was applied in their day and applied since then, came to mean the study of the true meaning of language and of words. Next step on a little journey, we're going to talk about pi, which I've used it before, but what is that? PIE is an acronym. PIE stands for Proto-Indo-European. The Proto-Indo-European culture is, and this is, as far as known, a widely accepted theory, but still a theory. There's a lot of proof in grammatical, in like looking at grammar, looking at language, and some records, but believe that there at some point was a small culture that originated roughly around here in Europe, and then could have come there from somewhere else, didn't just spawn there all of a sudden, and then from there spread out to other areas around Europe and elsewhere to become a large linguistic family that, as they were distanced by, first, well, distance and space, and then also time, as things changed and the cultures changed, the language also changed according to the needs of the people that were there. Which is how we go from this small little culture where we think it might have been in Europe to this, which is the languages where Indo-European based languages are currently spoken. Dark blue is the official languages. The slightly lighter blue is the secondary official language where it is in heavy use. Then you have recognized and significant use. A lot of this is based around, going to put this right up front, the colonization of numerous other countries by Britain and other European powers, which means that those countries who used Indo-European languages then forcibly influenced other countries. Vast amounts of Africa is the secondary official language because of the influence of European and American interests in Africa for many, many years. So this is not a topic that is not also fraught with its own historical landmines, shall we say. But this is the current state of showing how vast and how broad Indo-European languages have spread and how important they are to our current understanding of language. Naturally, the biggest one is going to be English, but we're going to see in a little bit, there's more than just that. This is a basic, there are more complex ones out here, so it cuts out a lot of the dead languages. This is a basic family tree of Proto-Indo-European. Starts off where we think it might have been, and we can reconstruct some words, or at least theories of what they could have been. Then it goes into Indo-Iranian, Hellenic, which is the Greek languages, Celtic, which have mostly died out, but some such as Irish, Scottish, Welsh still exist, Italic, which leads to Latin, Balto-Slavic, which we get Polish, Russian from. Those are also Indo-European languages, even though they use a different alphabet and look quite different. And then the Germanic languages, which English takes a lot of its roots from. In this little lesson, I'm going to be mostly focusing on Proto-Indo-European and Indo-European languages, especially English, because that is what has the most relevance and what I have the most familiarity with, is English and the building blocks, specifically Latin and Greek, that compose it, just in my long life, where have I lived, what cultures have I inhabited, etc. So there are other etymologies, I'm sure, for different cultures, especially like Eastern Asian cultures, like that undoubtedly have their own history, their own etymology. This is what I'm most familiar with and the study of. You can kind of see here if we find the first mention of English is Old English, down from Anglo-Frisian, from West Germanic, from Proto-Indo-European. And that's only a small branch of this little tree. We also have like Hindi, we have Dutch, we have Yiddish, we have Icelandic. There's so many different like offshoots of this branch that are all in some way connected through Proto-Indo-European, which often means most of these, or some of these, have similar grammar and similar vocabulary, and they diverge a lot. You probably wouldn't look at someone who is speaking French and someone who's speaking Hindi and say, yes, those are a similar or similar enough language. There are many, many differences there. But they can all come from a core spot and have some similarities at least. Right, and now we get into a brief history of the English language. Mind that this one video, which is probably going to be an hour or less long, is going to blitz through a lot. There could be an entire college course or even an entire university major built around what this is going to be covered in a very short amount of time. So not going to go too deep into the details, and feel free, if you're interested or engaged, look up things on your own. Plenty of fantastic resources out there. This is meant to be mostly a first look if you've never heard of etymology before and want to understand a little more of what's going on behind the scenes. All right. Here we have the UK, specifically Britain, with Ireland off to the side, sliding up above. And it was first owned, not first probably, but the point where things are interesting is owned by the Bretons who spoke Celtic. Then you get the Roman invasion. So 55 BC. They were around for quite a while, and Latin was the main language of commerce, especially among the Romans, and pushing out a lot of the Britons and really diminishing the importance of Celtic language, at least in the lower parts. Again, off in Ireland, up in Scotland, it stayed much more prevalent, but there is a diminishment just in there's less people living in this space, so it's less commonly used in kind of the lower parts of the UK. So there we have some Latin first coming in. Then we have the Germanic invasions, which was about 4 centuries later. But this is, some call it Germanic invasion, Germanic settlement, there are other names for it. Really is that 3 main groups came over, and mixture of combat and settling there for trade or other purposes, or land, we can take this. Have the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons who came through, and this was a more of a, instead of it is either entirely Latin or entirely Celtic languages, you start to get a bit more of a mingling, and there you have a lot of the Germanic influences coming through. And then to combine with that, you have Christianity. This is a little bit later on in the timeline, but you have missionaries and Christianity that are coming through. I think it was originally through a marriage of the King of England at the time, who was perhaps French, I believe, and came through and just shared the Bible, which is also more and more Latin, and a fair bit of Greek in there as well for different loan words and such things. And this is, a single book that a lot of people know, has a lot of vocabulary in it, and a lot of people are reading as they are starting to convert, at least having read to them, so the language is also starting to intermingle there. And this is still mostly a kind of just 2 distinct languages, but over time they did shift and start to grow closer together. This is when we get into, instead of being Bretons there, now we have Britain who's speaking Old English. And this is what Beowulf was written in, as far as we have recorded on that, which begins with Huate, and you can go and find a copy of that in the Old English and read through and see just what it looked like. Old English is still recognizable as English with heavy, heavy Germanic and Latin influences. It is faintly readable, where you can make out vocabulary words, but often with different or almost nonsensical spellings, it would seem. But you could sight read and go, okay, I at least understand 50% of this, perhaps. So still recognizably English, but in very archaic form, as it would be considered now. From here we have the Norman invasion, which is where things get wonky. Back in Europe, France had gotten a fair bit bigger. Joan of Arc was a big deal, very little linked to Christianity in that way. So that French is having its own influence, applying pressure to Greek and Latin, and also being influenced in return through Christianity, things like this. So then we have French coming over through the Norman invasion in 1066. William the Conqueror specifically won a big battle and became king of Britain. And almost immediately instated a thing where French was a language used among the courts, among the politics. Anything that was considered like highbrow, such as sciences or whatever, would be done in French, because that was what the rulers knew and the people they put in charge knew, and like, we're going to force people to use this. But often many of the like quote unquote peasantry or people of lower standing continued to use Old English as they talked, and over time these did mingle more, and you had more of the combining of the Old English core vocabulary and some of the grammar with then also grammar and vocabulary from French. So like, oh, we need a word for this. We don't have a word for it. Oh, French does. Let's do that. So a lot of the more highfalutin concepts we have may have originally come from French through the Norman invasion. That's how we get to Middle English, which is a combination of the Old English and the French coming together and kind of commingling this way. As we get a little more time of peaceable, like I shouldn't say peaceable there. This is when like the Rose Wars happened, plenty of fighting happened, but it was also a time where the kings shifted less from I'm a French king ruling over, or a king from France ruling over Britain to, oh, we're like 3 generations down now. I'm just the king of Britain. Why do these people like several countries away get to tell me how to run things? And the combination of the cultural identity and how it was being run shifting to being more about self than just being its own colony, and no like new sudden influences coming in to mess with the language again, gave some time to mature. Again, the languages merged together more, as well as the Renaissance happened, introducing even more Greek and Latin, as people were like, oh, they were so cool back then, those philosophers. They had some really good ideas, but also plenty of them were wrong. But we need clearly to reach back to the Greek and Latin. That's where the true roots lie. That's where like we can find true knowledge and philosophy. So that's where we get a bunch of the abstract concepts from, along with the known as the Great Vowel Shift, which is where a bunch of them just became shorter as people started talking faster or talking more or something. And hasn't been pinpointed why. There are plenty of theories out there, but words became shorter, which is the biggest difference between Middle English and what we have is now the early modern English or modern English. Which, speaking of, some of the final changes there were actually through literature. Two of the biggest ones, I'm sure this was a process and happened over time, but two of the biggest points we can turn to and exactly point out is Shakespeare and a dictionary. The dictionary is one that specifically wrote down, like, this is how you spell words, and it's kind of been in flux for some time, depending on, like, who the person was writing it, who was reading it. It might be different ways. But centralized spelling and also had something to do with grammar. And this is how you construct a sentence, how you do these things, and having them put down in that way, and this is the official way that you do it, kind of cemented that in some way. Other one being Shakespeare, who surprisingly added a whole bunch of new words into the vocabulary. Some that you like, there's only some that are very Shakespearean, but some that he used and are introduced that are still in regular use to like even now, 300 plus years later. So definitely had an influx there, and also was popular, and plays were certainly popular before Shakespeare, but had such an impact on the vocabulary and culture of plays and drama that a lot of people, instead of going to plays, would see if they could buy a copy of his printed plays and read them, which also helped to increase reading vocabulary and further cement these words and how those are being used in English form. They took out the sonnets, though, and ignored a lot of the meter. So we don't need that. That's a lot of extra work. And frankly, I would agree. I cannot speak in meter and would not want to try. But that is how we end up with to close what we have now, which is first the early modern and then relatively advanced into modern English. And this is something that is still evolving and still changing. Plenty of new words are introduced regularly based off of where you're at. Dialects change, where it's seen that British English, and that could be any number of it, probably a good dozen accents, are remarkably different in what words they use, the tone they use, how they say words, than you have then in American English. And even American English has like Southern Texan, it has the New York accent, the Boston accent. You hear less about Californian accents, I suppose, but there's certain ways that people say things and the way they pronounce things based off of their culture, how they grew up, and some of the distinctions that come about as group people drift apart, and after long enough, their dialect will shift to whatever is most needed or happens most regularly in their area. So this is why new words start getting introduced, like yeet, based. I often struggle with learning new words. A bit of a slow process for me, despite having seen it happen over and over again. Still can't quite get the hang of it. But there are plenty of new words still being introduced. Languages are still living in very real ways. There's a reason they keep on coming out with new dictionaries to better represent how people are seeing the implications and literal meanings of words as they shift over time. I'm sure if you open up that 1755 dictionary, you would find a marked difference from how they used words than how we might use the same word now. Getting to that, we're going to revisit our old friend from before. This is the same chart as before, but now we can actually look and see, okay, where does the modern English kind of come from? We have the Celtic roots in which were originally there, and a lot of this has been lost, but there's still some small elements of grammar and vocabulary kind of slipped through the cracks that managed to survive. We have the West German that came through with the Germanic invasions. This is where a lot of the core vocabulary came from. It's in the basic grammar. Our numbering system is very, very heavily inspired by West Germanic. You have Latin with the Bible and the Romans that came through. Lots of words from that, lots of bases for words, including some of the Greek from the Bible and elsewhere. There's no arrow exactly being drawn through here. You have the Old Norse, kind of skip past a little bit earlier, but with Christianity they had churches built up along the coastline, which Scandinavian Vikings were like, those seemed great, would come by, raid, and eventually some settled down to trade, to set up shop, to try and actually run businesses and trading centers and stuff and such there, which would get some Old Norse influence, which is another similarly Germanic language. So it's got some stuff from that, and as well as French with the Norman invasion, which was then combined to get the Middle English, which then again evolved further into modern English. This is a process of over 1,000 years, numerous people coming and being like, this small island looks great. We're going to camp out here and get rid of anyone who tries to get in our way. So very much a weird melting pot of languages and cultures, which is a lot of why English is such a difficult language to learn, because you are learning bits and pieces from at least 5 different languages that don't really fit together very well much of the time. And that's why it is a complex language, but one that has a lot of room for continued growth, I believe. We can get a bit more into the actual title of this video, which is etymology. The first bit with etymology is some of the basic roots. Talk about the building blocks before. These can mostly be split into the root or the base, which is often spelled out in full capitals, and this is what provides the main meaning of the base, of the word. You can have multiple bases combined together, which then try and merge those meanings. You can also have a prefix, which goes before and has a dash after it, which then often can act almost like a preposition, like up from, down against, and a suffix which goes at the end, has a hyphen before it, and often alters what kind of word it is. You can have a ending or a suffix that changes a word from a noun to an adjective, or from an adjective to a verb, etc., etc. It can get very complex, and there might be actually more words than you realize that have 2 or 3 of these suffixes, where it has changed the word meaning of the word over time. A couple other ones that you'll see, and probably good to at least be aware of in terms of etymology, is specialization, as a word becomes more specific over time, from something like maybe meaning any kind of field to, okay, no, this specific kind of field. Or same thing for specific kind of vegetables. Generalization, which is the opposite, becoming a specific kind of vegetable becoming a word for all vegetables or this certain kind of crop, whatever. Elevation, a word becoming more positive in meaning over time. Where you have something that originally meant something like very bad, now it's like, oh no, it's okay, it's not that bad. Generation, the exact opposite, becoming worse in meaning over time. These things that can happen over words and means if you look something up in the past, oh, it actually isn't that bad as it used to mean before. Or oh my, I can't believe they once said that to each other, and now we just use it in daily conversation. And that's part of how words shift in meaning. There are plenty of other ways that words can shift in meaning over time. These are just some of the basic 4 that are good to be aware of. Last one is actually sound changes. Which you have assimilation, which is sound shifting to sound more similar. Assimilation was originally add similation, add being like towards or together. Now it is assimilation because that's easier and faster to pronounce. That's often how assimilation works. It is towards easier to pronounce and increasing the speed at which you can do it. So speed and clarity. Dissimilation is becoming less similar. Kernel is an example of this, where you can clearly look at the word and you have the two L sounds. It would be colonel. But it has now changed where it is kernel, because then we have an R instead of an R and an L instead of two L's. And it's still confusing, and they probably should have changed the spelling as well, but that's an example of becoming more distinct to help tell it apart. This is less common, so good to be aware of when you're looking at, okay, how did this word go from this first form to the second one? And the one that is very common is vowel gradation, which can be either like upwards or downwards, but is just the vowels in a word changing to show a difference in meaning. This can just be plural, like in this case, foot, feet. People often joke about moose, meese, goose, geese. But it can also sometimes change the actual meaning of the word itself and not just pluralize it. So if you're looking at a base that, for example is like from up above, jacked, if there's a word where it could potentially switch to jacked or jocked, that's something that can happen just through the word usage. It's still the same base, probably, but could mean something different just as the word changes and shifts. All right, last thing in this video, this is going to be a very short one. We might not even breach half an hour. Is going to be talking about just going over some examples of etymology, just some more basic ones I found to kind of demonstrate some of this. First word is educate. Okay, easy enough to teach someone something. It's a verb. Breaking it apart a little bit, we have different parts. We have a prefix, x, which is more like out, from, duke, which is, actually, get these on, duke, which is lead, or like, take somewhere, guide, and then ate, which is just saying, this is a verb, this is an action someone is taking. So, okay, you can kind of get how we get there. We get, to teach someone something is to lead someone out. And this could be, you could take this metaphorically, like lead them out like into the sunshine, or it could be literally by leading someone out, you're going to teach them something. And then over time, through specialization, it became more specific to mean, instead of just leading someone out and they're going to learn something, you're leading someone out to teach them something. Therefore, the meaning shifted, and that's how we get the version that we use right now. Next up is conduct, which is a bit tricky one because it could be someone's conduct is how they act, or with some vowel changes in there is how you pronounce it, to conduct is to direct music, which is a very different meaning. We might see how we actually get there. It splits up into no suffix. Some words don't have to have suffixes. If they don't need it or just it's dropped over time. Con, which is like with or together, and then duct, which is, again, lead. This one has a T on the end, but it's still the same meaning. And that can happen where there can be different forms of a base. It's usually good to know, okay, which ones have multiple forms. If it can have a T, it doesn't have to have a T. If it always has this letter, and again, no suffix there. But okay, you can see maybe someone's conduct, how they act, is probably, okay, how they lead themselves, this is more like reflexive sense, when together with other people. Someone's conduct is their manners, it is how they behave with other people. Or you could lead together with other people. You could conduct people in music as you are leading them in when to do the beats, or when to play the specific kind of music, but you're doing it as a group. Here's one that gets a bit more complex. Sanguine, knowing some of the more fantasy or ancient meanings, just currently means happy or cheerful. But if we look at the base, we're looking at a single word, sanguis, from Latin. And that just means blood. So how do we go from blood to mean happy or cheerful? And this is something that takes context. This is one of the biggest things in etymology that makes it difficult. Because unless you are actually from that area and knew the culture, understand how the shift happened, it's very easy to fall into folk etymology, which could be someone saying you could say, okay, like blood. So when someone is red in the face or has an excess of blood or whatever, okay, they're happy and cheerful. And that could be true, could be folk etymology, in which case you're just saying this, you're looking at 2 points and saying, oh, I can draw a line here. And maybe you can, maybe you can't, but without actual knowledge of the culture and why the shift happened, it can be a little tricky to go out on a limb and say, this means this exactly. So there can always be a little bit of almost everything in etymology is a theory, and some are more direct, some are a bit more roundabout, and the roundabout ones are scary to say exactly, we know why this happened. So just word of warning to be cautious with that. In this case, the example I gave was probably a little closer to home than it should have been. There's the idea of the four humors. This is in Elizabethan era and also farther back in Rome and Greece, mostly in the Elizabethan era. You have the idea of the four humors. You have the, I believe it is blood, yellow bile, black bile, and pus, I believe might have been the fourth one. Can never remember. But specifically, blood was considered to be the passionate humor. And if you had too much of it, you might be angry, or you might be very happy, laughing until you're red in the face. So it's just passion, strong emotion. And if you had too much of it, whether by drinking, you could be very happy, or you could be very, very angry. But if you had too little of the blood, then you would be sad. This is why, in some cases, bloodletting or leeching was an actual medical technique in the past. So oh, you've been super angry or upset. We're going to take some of that blood. Oh, look, it worked. You're calmer now. You're more calm. Yes, that's called blood loss. We got to figure it out eventually. Only some time of mistakes. But you can see here how now with this extra bit of knowledge, of context, and the culture of the time, how you could go from something, oh, the person's very bloody, very red in the face, to, okay, they're happy and cheerful. It could have entirely switched to mean sanguine could mean very angry or upset, but instead it just means happy and cheerful. It's something that just happens with words. People use them in one context more than the other, and just kind of picks up speed and keeps rolling. Next one is superfluous, which just means unneeded or unnecessary. Here's how that breaks down, with flu being the essential one. And this is another one that's a bit of metaphor, but not as necessary to have cultural context as sanguine, where super just means above and beyond. Pretty obvious, Superman, etc. Flu, it just means to flow. And you'd be surprised how many words this comes up in. It is a very metaphorical word often. It gets used a fair amount. And then ous is an ending that is an adjective ending and means it's just a large amount or full of. In this case, something that is full of too much flowing, like if you were filling up a container with water or a pot and you don't stop and just overflowing over the top, well, whatever's overflowing the top is unneeded or unnecessary because it doesn't fit in the pot. So that's another example of how it's a bit of a metaphor, but less of a leap. This last one is one of my personal favorites, when I found out very recently and partially inspired me to do this, is you have the origin of sycophant. Someone who flatters, often this is someone who flatters someone above them or in some kind of higher station to try and get favor from them, to be seen as someone who's valuable, you want to keep around by their side for whatever benefits they get out of it. Breaking this one down, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you have sycophant, psych meaning fig. The O is a combining vowel, I mentioned before, but often you have multiple bases in a word. You will put an O or an I in between them to show, okay, there's a little bit distance here and make it easier to say. A lot of bases start off with consonants and a lot of bases end with consonants. So to have the combining vowel, in those cases, not mandatory, but often shows up to make it easier to pronounce. Because sycophant, easy enough. Sycophant, little harder to tell what's going on there. Fan is okay. Another base means okay to show or to reveal. So, and the last one is just one who is a person kind of ending, show that there's a person doing this action. So this is someone who is showing or revealing a fig. And you have to go from that meaning to someone who flatters someone else to get favor. That's a pretty big jump. But again, cultural context can make a lot of things clearer. Back in ancient Greece, or classical Greece, there were numerous elections, and you would try and encourage people to favor. It was often something akin to a popularity contest. Not that that has changed much. but it was considered to be bad form to publicly like slander or tell your followers to slander a politician in private. So there was rumors of certain politicians who would tell their followers like behind closed doors or spread rumors or try and get the followers to do without directly being known that they did so, to mock their public opponents. Like while they're giving a speech, show up, cause a mess, and disrupt whatever they're trying to do. There was a rude gesture at the time, which was holding up like your thumb between the first two fingers of your hand, which was meant to represent a fig, which in turn represented something a bit more personal and quite rude. Not going to go any deeper into it there, but it was a way very much of like mocking the enemies. So if you had a whole bunch of people like showing up, making a rude gesture, that's going to cause a mess, but real bad if a politician is known to do this. So a cycling was someone who would show up and do it anyway, potentially harming their own personal reputation to try and gain influence or show like, yes, I'll sacrifice this thing for you, for whoever their actual political, like whoever person they actually politically followed or believed in. That's something where it's, again, a very tricky meaning, one that you have to kind of look at and interrogate to get to understand, but one that's very interesting. You think, okay, how did it go from, fig shower to someone who is like flatters or, fawns on someone who is a fire station than them? And that's what's so interesting to me about etymology and study of words, is entirely this idea of trying to follow that trail. And resisting folk etymology and the urge to say, I understand this as much as possible when you don't have proof or cultural context, it is very fun to learn new things about going forward, and this is how this happens, and this is how this happens, and we get from point A to point B. It is, I find it very fun just to look up words, honestly. And I would recommend is, that I've used before, is Etym Online, ETYM Online, which is a site which just tries to collect and gather etymological definitions and explain how you go from one word to the next. And very entertaining also, just like kind of scroll through and just see what different words are. You could be surprised like how you get from some to the rest. Other ones is that if you just go to most like large dictionary websites, they'll have under most words, they will have a definition and then an origin of how it got there. So just going through that and trying to see, okay, how do we get from this to this? In perhaps a little bit less detail, but still entertaining to see where the words come from and where to be used so casually nowadays, what gave birth to them, and then how have they changed over time. It's a odd little hobby of mine, perhaps. But that is practically all that I have in this case. That is, again, very, very short stream. Did make it over half an hour, which is good. But certainly I did keep the history of Britain and the English language briefer than I thought I would, because there is a lot to dig into there that I did not want to take up too much time with. But if you are finding this later, I hope this was educational, or hopefully got you excited about learning more about words itself. Again, as there's the asterisk on my little hat in the icon, this is that asterisk. Verify. Don't trust what anyone on the internet says unless they are a proven source, and I am not a proven source. I have knowledge and I have some experience. Please look it up yourself, find other people, find corroboration, and look it up for yourself. Don't just accept the first word of the first person who tells you about something. I could be wrong about things. It has been a very long life, and my memory is not one of my strong suits. So take with a grain of salt, look it up, but if this has made you excited or interested in exploring some of these ideas of words and language yourself, fantastic. That is all that I wanted. But please, if you've stuck around this long, thank you very much. Feel free to leave any comments of things that may have gotten wrong, or things that you're interested in, or your own favorite words and etymological definitions. I would love to see them. Right, and probably going to end it there. Very, very short stream, but take care, and thank you for stopping by.